Can you give us a brief account of how and why this book came to be?
So how the book came about was, I was already thinking along the lines that, well, it would be good to write down some of the things that I needed to persistently tell other people, other copyists to do all the time, writing endless style sheets and notation rules down. But at the same time, our commissioning editor was working on new books for a new syllabus that was coming out to replace the exams we have here for 16-year-olds. The old O-levels were being replaced by GCSEs. And she said to me, can you write something for that market? Can you write a notation for beginners, in effect? And I said, okay, yes, I'd love the chance to do something. So notation for beginners started off, I think I drafted about 3 chapters before I went back to her. It must have been at least 2 weeks later, and said, you know what, I don't really know this education market at that level, but what I would like to do is write down everything I know, and I'd like to write it for the top end of the market. And I think there is a gap there. The wonderful old books were out of print. The Gardner Reed and the Kurt Stone, both wonderful books which I'd read and absorbed at university, were pretty much out of print, so there was this gap in the market. So I persuaded Faber that actually, yes, I thought there was something we could put, a big book there, we could publish. None of us realised exactly how big that would be. Well, I did. I thought I could just write down everything that I knew off the top of my head, and that's all there was to say. And that's how the first draft was. And of course, as soon as I got to the end of the first draft, I started to research and started to know that there was so much more to say. Every time I'd finished a draft, I'd go back and flesh it out further. But it got to a point where I thought, yes, I've got in most of what I need, most of what I think should be there. I spend a lot of time, refining the structure, revising content as I went along. So I started that in 1991. I finished a pretty fulsome draft in 1996, at which point I asked 3 pretty eminent musicians, composers and a conductor, to read the whole thing through and give me their honest opinion of the content, what was there, what should stay, should be anything that should go, should there be anything else included. So I had their feedback, which was on the whole incredibly encouraging and very positive. They were quite tough on me when saying, you've mentioned this and this, but what do you think of this? Do you recommend this? Should people be using this kind of technique or laying out something in a particular way? So at that point, I came down very much on, yes, this is going to stay in. I'm going to recommend this or not. And if I didn't have cast iron arguments for the way to do things, or I hadn't found things in my research that suggested that there were common ways of doing things, and things that I didn't have an intellectually watertight reason for keeping in, went at that point, because I knew that I had to stand by everything that I wrote in the book. It wasn't enough to have anything woolly in there. I actually wanted to find reasons why particular notation things are done in particular ways, and to write, if I found a rule or found a reason why engravers had been doing something for a long time and why there was a reason they were doing that, to write that down so that people would be able to remember. The reader would have a reason to remember why something is done in a particular way. Quite a lot of that I didn't find from other notation books. There were rules that engravers had passed down to generation on generation, I think, in the traditional publishing houses, and where they'd been doing the engraving, and some of those things I researched and thought, well, yes, this looks like there's a pattern here across what different engraving houses were doing as I go along, as well as comment on it if I think it could be done in a clearer way, or reviewing it with the passage of time.
Your book is affectionately referred to as the Bible on music engraving tips. It is constantly used as a reference for authoritative answers to questions on the forum, sometimes without considering the contextual prose around the examples. How do you feel about being considered such an authority figure in the area? Do you think the book is misused in this way?
Well, that's a big responsibility to live up to. Of course, everyone at Faber wanted me to be the expert. So I realised that as soon as I set myself up to write the book, that immediately meant that I was setting myself up to be recognised as an expert. That pressure that you have to stand by everything that you write, and therefore everything that you write, you want to be correct and you want it not to be misleading. Hence the music examples with the contexts and trying to write around that, when and what to use, where and when, and put the conditions in. And of course it's possible to misread how to use something if you don't read on and read through the rest of the paragraph or the related subjects. No one has really documented this particular thing before very much. And so there needs to be a decision made, or rather that's what I want the book to be about. It's to help people make decisions very quickly. So I don't mind if people disagree at all with what I say should be the case or what I recommend when there are different options. What I want to raise is awareness that there is an issue to be decided upon and something to be edited, a consistency point about a particular aspect of the notation to be addressed. And that's the important thing. Once you've read that in a book, you should be aware of whatever the point is in your own compositions or your own engraving, and therefore make a decision about how you want something to look. If you're unaware of something, then you will let it be written in an inconsistent way, which will raise questions for the musician. That's why I put in everything, really everything I could think of I thought would be useful. So many things that I had never found written down where I wanted the answers. And when I was a music copyist, I remember having scores and thinking, well, okay, I've got 6 sharps on this right-hand chord. How do I arrange them? There was nobody who had an answer. There was a silence on the phone when I rang Faber and said, well, how exactly would you like me to do this? Because I've looked at score X, Y, and Z, and they do it differently. And of course, once I started researching, that's when I found that things were much more complex than I thought. And every conceivable way you can ever think that a person could arrange any amount of symbols on a page, someone will have done it in every possible way you can think of at some time or other. That's when I realised, okay, I need to actually formulate some reasons for doing it in a particular way. And hopefully those will make sense to other people. There'll be a logic that can then be followed through.
A huge amount of an engraver's knowledge is functionally institutional. House styles, things that are passed down, etc. To Behind Bars' credit, it writes down a lot of these things that are just in people's heads. The Gardner Reed and Kurt Stone books do a pretty good job in certain areas, but are nowhere near as comprehensive of an overview, which is why I think people gravitate to Behind Bars. Almost every conceivable situation has been covered, which I think a lot of people are very appreciative of that.
I mean, that's wonderful, because that was exactly my aim. I mean, those 2 books have some really great strengths, and the Kurt Stone was a real inspiration in terms of its succinctness and its layout, and it was a breath of fresh air after some of the other rather more verbose books. And you could find things really easily, and I just thought that's what I want to do. I really want to combine the information that these 2 books give. Plus, I want to do a lot of research with players and to update anything that those 2 previous books had documented, but where there might be other things to say. It's very easy to forget when you're in the complex world of very dense scores, and suddenly you think, actually, how should those rests be look in 3/4, or how should something very simple look? After a while, if you've been looking at a score where something is done in a non-traditional way, you can sometimes actually think, oh, hold on, what is right? And that's why I found I was just going to, every single point was going to be made with a music example. because I didn't want people to actually be having to spend a lot of time reading the text. And of course, the most interesting thing was how long it took us to get the examples that were not supposed to look good. The engraver who did the music examples was saying, well, this looks terrible. And I said, yes, that's the point, to train people to realise why something doesn't look legible, as well as why it does, and why it's so important that something is fixed.
Jared from Australia writes, at what stage will it be necessary to write Behind Bars 2?
I'm pretty happy with what's in there. We could have put more in, and in the end there was so much that I felt was so important to say. Anything that seemed that it was only going to be used by a very few people just came out, because there was so much information there. I didn't want to make the information that was there any harder to find by having lots of things that didn't seem relevant to anybody. Interestingly, one or two of the critics, or the reviewers, should I say, when the book came out in 2011, there really wasn't very much that they thought should be there that wasn't there already. There was an interesting comment from Julian Anderson in his Tempo review. He thought I could have taken account of more extended techniques and their notation, and particularly Sciarrino and Lachman. So two Middle European composers writing a lot of extended techniques with very, very individual notation. And I said to Julian, I think that's a really terrific idea to write a book with the extended techniques, and you're going to write it. It was a difficult line to draw between what is notation and what is orchestration, and at what point do I stop documenting extended techniques? How many do I include? And we felt in the original draft that I finished in '96, we felt that we had a little bit too much of documenting techniques, because you had to explain them and then say the notation was this. If there was another source I could refer people to, then that was something I did with the harp in particular. I kept in everything I thought that was pretty much in common usage. I did put in recommended symbols. I don't think I invented anything. All the symbols that I suggested came from ones that have been used, because, as you know, my main concern is that the notation is communication, and as soon as you start putting in fancy or individual symbols that musicians don't know what they mean, then you start to put a layer of complexity in your score, and you start to actually push them away. I think you alienate them as soon as they're looking at music and they don't know why something is on the page, and they've got to look it up. They're not just playing your one piece ever. If you've got notation that they've got to sit down and read, have they got time to do that? Are they doing this one piece in a workshop with one rehearsal for half an hour? Have they got time to even look at what it is you're trying to do, or trying to express with some new things that maybe they don't know? Or is that simply going to take up the entire rehearsal time while the conductor explains to them how you play something, where in fact it could have been written in a way that they were more likely to understand, and then you spend time rehearsing the piece and not rehearsing the notations. So again, you'll know that's one of my big messages in the book. What one should focus on is that ease of communication.